When I started watching this movie, my default was to assume that Catherine Eagle's character, Jane Nichols, was the most unhinged character in the entire film. I mean, the entire sequence at the start had her jumping all over the place like a yo yo to be the bridesmaid at two separate weddings simultaneously. Like, she made such an impression that Ziggy, the cab driver, recognized her on sight months later. So, I'm watching this movie constantly wondering how on earth someone can be so unhinged, all because of a love for weddings. And then I continued to watch it and I realized that the problem isn't with Jane. Matter of fact, when you really consider it, apart from her people pleasing ways, she is one of the more sanest characters in the movie. No, the unhinged behavior actually is one that applies to practically every single character we got to see in 27 Dresses. It's so bad, I had to ask myself, is it the water? Is there something in the water? Because there's absolutely no way these characters are acting like Jane is the one who is the most outrageous when the lot of them are out of their damn minds. Now, this would be the second Catherine Eagle movie I'm watching in less than a month, and I gotta say, based off of the absolute low bar, that was the ugly truth. 27 Dresses is way ahead of that absolute mess, and for that, I am grateful. It still works for me, though, as a great peak for Romcom Gander Tuesday. Now, for those just finding my channel or who are just stumbling on this series for the first time, Romcom Gander Tuesday is a weekly video series I have on my channel whereby I pick a rom-com from the late 80s to the mid 2010s. Often it's a rewatch. On rare occasion, it can be the first time watch. Either way, I watch the film and analyze it to see how well they hold up years later, especially viewing them through my now adult and slightly more cynical lens. And for those who are about to go all but Noria, this is Wednesday. Yes, what can I say? I had something come up yesterday, so you're getting a Romcom Ganda Tuesday video on a Wednesday. You're welcome, I guess. Now, if this is your first time discovering this series, kindly know that I usually split these videos into three parts: the intro, which is what you're watching right now, the synopsis of the movie, and finally my thoughts. As such, I will have timestamps put in so you can navigate this video as you so choose. But of course, before I move on to the synopsis part of the video, I will first like to say a big thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been pretty damn instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Kat, Lena, Sherry, and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses to mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, maybe even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. And with that all said and done, 27 Dresses drops us right in the middle of a wedding and the origin story of what will turn Jane Nichols into a bridesmaid extraordinaire. Jane, you see, age 8, is at the wedding of a relative with her recently widower father and her baby sister Tess. We established that her father is currently way in over his head, having to take care of two girls with his wife's passing, and so the responsibility of caring for her baby sister falls on a young Jane. This is important to note and keep in mind. Now, Jane cares for Tess at the wedding and stumbles on the bride who's had a fashion mishap. But thanks to Jane's quick thinking, the wedding dress is saved, and so is the wedding itself by extension. And Jane is pleased to have been of service, deciding immediately that she loves weddings and is quite ecstatic at the thought of one day having hers. Mind you, she's 8. Fast forward to over 20 years later, and Jane has taken said thought and run with it to the point where she's now a bridesmaid extraordinaire, having held that position for 27 different weddings. Matter of fact, the movie drops us in the middle of adult Jane attending two separate weddings across town from each other at the exact same time, which involves her having commissioned a cab for the entire night as she spends the time going in and out of different weddings, complete with dress changes, so she could be at two places at the same time. This action of hers catches the attention of Kevin Doyle, who spots her, but she doesn't notice him immediately. When events has them sharing a cab, however, Kevin immediately clocks that Jane actually had the balls to attend two separate weddings on the same night at the same time and is flawed at her choice since he isn't a fan of weddings and cannot conceive of why someone would enjoy them so much to be present for two of them at the same time. Now, Jane isn't impressed at Kevin's cynicism, especially as it pertains to their opposing thoughts on love and weddings. And during the course of their argument, she accidentally leaves her planner in the cab as she heads on home. Kevin, though, spots the planner and instead of attempting to return it to her immediately, chooses instead to look through where he discovers that Jane is even more obsessed with weddings than he had initially thought. This then gives him the idea to write about her, using her as a feature piece that would get him out of his current gig that sees him as Malcolm Doyle, a known writer who covers wedding commitments for his newspaper. Now, whilst that job might seem cushy to others, Kevin wants to do more serious writing and he believes writing about Jane, this woman who is so obsessed with weddings and being a bridesmaid, would be his hit. His boss agrees to the pitch and agrees to his request that if he does turn in a great feature, she will take him off writing marriage commitments in their newspaper and let him do more serious journalism and writing. Jane, meanwhile, who has zero idea that her life is about to be upended, is at work looking for her missing planner whilst at the same time dealing with the unrequited crush that she has on her boss, George, who is back at the office from a climbing trip. George is Jane's perfect dream man, and she knows him so well that she's able to anticipate his every need and finish his sentences, even though George only sees her as his very efficient assistant. Her colleague, Casey, tries to get Jane to not be so obvious with her crush since everyone in their office, except for George, knows about Jane's unrequited crush on him. But Jane isn't listening. She's instead caught up in the bouquet of roses that show up at her desk and is addressed to her with no notes. With that mystery unsolved, she turns her focus on her younger sister Tess, who is back at home and staying at Jane's. Tess is miles apart from Jane since she's more the party loving type, which means that when it's time for Jane's colleague's engagement party, Tess shows up. Before she does so, however, there's a brief moment when Jane thought that the flowers she got had come from George, who had told her that he left something for her on her desk. Except the something he left was instead his dry cleaning bill, leaving the mystery still unresolved. Of course, this ends up being the least of Jane's worries when Tess shows up to the party and she catches the eye of George, who is intrigued by her, and the two of them end up spending the evening together to Jane's dismay. Meanwhile, Kevin shows up to Jane's office later on, confirming that the flowers had been from him, and he hands her a planner which she had been looking for. He also offers to buy her a drink, but Jane turns him down since, she's still hung up on George. George that she cannot stop talking about, which means that when Tess pumps her for information about George, Jane's crush comes spewing forth as she tells her sister everything that she likes about him. Tess, who has no idea that her big sister is in love with her boss, instead tells all the information she's received, for example, that George is a vegetarian who loves dogs and is an outdoorsy person, into a means for her to turn herself into this ideal persona fit for George. And George, of course, falls for her and soon after proposes to Tess. Now, Tess and George then go to Jane and Tess's father's store to break the news to him, and he in turn gives Tess their mother's wedding dress. This breaks Jane's heart since she's always dreamed of getting married in their mother's wedding dress, something that Tess is very much aware of, but Jane gives her sister permission to have the dress even though it breaks her. Feeling down in the dumps, she finally agrees to meet with Kevin, who realizes quickly that Jane has a problem saying no and so sets out to coach her in learning how to say no. The lesson, though, doesn't help Jane, who, although is very well aware that Tess would most likely insist on her helping her plan her entire wedding, still can't tell her kid sister no and so agrees to help her plan said wedding to Jane's dream man wearing Jane's dream dress. And as if that wasn't bad enough, she also chooses to get married in Jane's dream wedding location, namely the boathouse where their parents had gotten married. To make matters worse for Jane, whilst meeting and successfully convincing a baker to agree to bake her sister's wedding cake on very short notice, Tess wants to get married in 3 weeks. When you lie like that, you need to move fast. Anyway, Jane runs into Kevin, which is when she discovers that he's also Malcolm Doyle, the columnist who's writing about weddings she's always adored. But now the magic is gone as she realizes that the person who writes the most romantic things about wedding days is the most cynical man she's ever met. Kevin convinces Jane, though, to invite him over to her apartment, and at some point, it discovers her closet full of bridesmaid dresses. And what then follows is a montage of Jane dressing up in said bridesmaid dresses, which Kevin takes loads of pictures of as she tells him about the hilarious stories of the wedding she's attended and how ultimately for her, she's willing to do all of that because the bride's happiness is the most important on that day. And she hopes that the friends she's made in the course of her being a bridesmaid will show up for her in the same way she showed up for them. Of course, Jane has no idea that part of what is driving Kevin's curiosity is the fact that he's writing a piece on her. And whilst he starts to fall for her and is feeling guilty at the fact that he had approached her under false pretenses, he still has to hand over the first draft of his piece when his boss, Maureen, asks for it. And matters become more complicated when Maureen loves the piece and expresses her desire to publish the feature immediately. Kevin begs her to give him a week so that he can make the tweaks and corrections he wants to add to said writing, with the hope that it would buy him enough time to give Jane the heads up about the article before it's released. Unfortunately for him, that night they are stuck running errands, and after a night of singing Elton John's Benny and the Jets to a delighted bar, Kevin and Jane have sex, and the next morning, whilst they are getting coffee and breakfast, the news drops as Jane is recognized from the article. Feeling betrayed and used, she storms off, effectively ending their blossoming relationship. Tess, meanwhile, is furious at the article, not because of how invasive it was towards her sister Jane, but because she was painted as this bridezilla. And then to make matters worse, she basically rips up their mother's wedding dress and uses part of it for her own wedding dress, a decision that turns out to be the last straw for Jane, who demands that Tess tell George the truth about who she actually is, or she will. Tess does not, which means that at her and George's engagement party, Jane, who at this point is completely spiraling, proceeds to expose all of Tess's lies, a decision that leads to George cancelling the wedding since he believes that the Tess he was about to marry is nothing like who she had claimed to be. Even Jane's colleague and friend Casey is surprised about Jane's drastic actions, but Kevin, who had figured out that Jane was in love with George and had showed up to support her, cheers her on for finally doing something selfish and imperfect for once in her life. Jane still isn't willing to give Kevin the time of day and she walks away. The next morning, she runs into her sister at their father's store, and the two of them bury the hatchet when Ted reveals that her life isn't as perfect and put together as Jane had assumed. That night at the office, George, who had invited Jane to be his date for a gala event for work purposes, mentions that the reason why he's so fond of Jane is because she's so reliable and never tells him no. This is the statement that finally has Jane seeing just how much she's bound herself to a man who doesn't even have feelings for her and has effectively put her own career on hold for him. After blurting out that she's had a crush on him since she started working for him, George kisses Jane, but they both realize that neither of them feel any spark towards the other. This realization that the person she feels that spark for is Kevin leads to Jane chasing Kevin to the last wedding he's covering for the marriage commitment column, since he's now a feature writer, and she proceeds to not just crash the wedding, but confesses her love for Kevin as well. The two kiss to the delight of the crowd and the bride herself, which, girl, what? That was your wedding. Anyway, 1 year later, Jane and Kevin are getting married. Tess, who is her chief's bridemaid, has a do-over first introduction with George, which we are meant to read as them eventually getting their happy ending. And all 27 of the brides that Jane had been a bridesmaid for show up, each wearing the outfit that Jane had worn to their wedding, and now they get to serve as her bridesmaids. The end. This movie turned me into, quite honestly, one of those older women that goes, while I never, every couple of minutes, was clutching onto my non existent pearls. Like, I know AI has taken over practically everything, even though I refuse to give it the satisfaction of owning my soul. But just think about pre AI, right? When you open Google and type in the definition of a word, and it brings up either the Merriam Webster or Oxford's definition of said word. And then when you pop into Google image search, it pulls up an image that fits that word. Remember that? Remember that? Yeah, I honestly think if we type in the word unhinged, this is the movie that should pop out. This is the image that should pop out because 27 dresses is the very definition of the word. And to be fair, they did give us that heads up. I mean, the opening sequence of events for adult Jane, not when she was a child, mind you, but adult Jane was her in a wedding dress getting fitted for a dress that was not hers, a wedding dress that was not hers. Like, walk with me here for a moment. You have a bride getting married. This is meant to be the happiest day of her life that she's dreamed of, yada, yada, yada. And said bride couldn't even be bothered to show up for her fittings and instead had her bridesmaid, Jane, stand in for her. I mean, if that isn't unhinged behavior, I don't know what is. Like, I do not give half a flying fuck that the bride and Jane had the same dress size. Why is she the one getting fitted for the bride's wedding dress? Like, what the hell? I swear, that scene broke my brain. Also, because a part of said brain got stuck on the fact that just because said bride and Jane were the same size, dress size, didn't automatically mean that their bodies were identical. For example, are they even the same height? I paused the movie and went off on a rant in my living room right in front of the TV, trying to make it make sense. And then by the time I finished the movie, I realized that that was basically my entire movie watching experience for this film because it was just chock full of unhinged actions, decisions, and behaviors. And due to the deluge of sheer unhingedness, I realized that some actions were more unhinged than others for me. For example, let's look at the character of Jane's baby sister Tess. Now, I'm sure a lot of people who watch the movie probably would recognize Tess at her most unhinged, being when she lied about her interest and her being a vegetarian to George in order to get him to like her. Because, starting your marriage on such false grounds is basically you setting yourself up for a lifetime of having to sneak in moments to devour a rack of ribs when your significant other and the love of your life isn't in the same room. For others, Tess at her most unhinged was probably when she basically conscripted a fucking child to help clean her house, paid said child so that he immediately ties that into something he wants to do on the regular for the rest of his life. After all, what kid doesn't want to earn some money on the side and then proceeds to convince said child to lie to her fiance, who is his big brother from the local YMCA program, because she knows instinctively that what she's doing is wrong? See, it's an increasing bit of unhingedness that is pure test and that is most certainly a recipe for disaster. And yet, for me, that wasn't test at her most unhinged. No, Siree. The honor of that goes undisputedly to Theresa Nichols having the audacity to cut up and destroy their mother's wedding dress because, bitch, what? Excuse you? And the worst part of it is, if Tess had no idea just how much that wedding dress meant to Jane, who she knows has always dreamed of being able to replicate their mother's wedding, if Tess had no idea of the significance of the dress, I could have let it go, maybe gotten around to forgive her. But no, ma'am. She knew. She knew, but she cut up the dress anyway so she can incorporate it into her own dress. Like, could the scene itself have been a metaphor for Tessa's desire to pretend to fit into the traditions of what is expected of her, thus forcing her to pretend to be something slash someone that she actually isn't, which then spilled into her relationship with George? Maybe. But I still think it was her at her most unhinged, especially when she followed it up by handing Jane the shredded remains of the dress and told her that she can have that for her wedding when it came around. Like, bitch, what? Oh, to have the power of being able to reach into a screen and Yankee someone's hair out. Tess Nichols is so lucky for that. Otherwise, I would have turned her ass bald. And then there's the character of Malcolm Doy, or Kevin, as he introduced himself to Jane. Now, I'm not going to attempt to deny that his decision to write the article about Jane being the perpetual bridesmaid was one of the most unhinged things he could have done. And Jane being pissed off at his ass was legit the absolute right thing to do. The fact that he invaded her privacy in such a way and wrote of her in a way that basically turned her into this joke that Half the city mocked and the other half pitied was just foul. But I still stand by my belief that Kevin, at his most unhinged, was him finding Jane's planner and deciding not to return it immediately, but instead snoop through it, discover the many weddings she had scheduled to attend, and then he ripped out a week out of her planner. See, I can maybe get around to forgiving his ass for snooping through a planner. Curiosity, as they say, killed the cat. And since the planner is right there, I can imagine someone not being able to resist the temptation of looking through it. It happens to the best of us. What I cannot forgive is his ass tearing out a page out of her planner. Like, excuse me? The planner is sacrosanct. It is how my day is structured. It helps my AUDHD as plan, so I know what is coming up in the next couple of days to a month, and I can stay somewhat sane. The thought of someone ripping out a week worth of planned events with some patronizing line about helping me live in the moment and some bullshit, I will commit a crime. Kevin's ass is so goddamn lucky because he would have been on the news. The fucking audacity. Like, yes, the article was humiliating, but the sheer disrespect of messing with Jane's planner, that for me was him at his most unhinged. Because what? And speaking of the article, I'm sorry, but Kevin's boss, Maureen, is just as unhinged as every other character in this movie. Because what do you mean by you just published an article about an actual human being, complete with pictures of her, unauthorized pictures of her that your columnist took under false pretenses, and you just ran it in the pages of your citywide newspaper without attempting to get clearance for that? An article that basically cast a lot of aspersions on her character because of her bridesmaid status. If not that we are working with the logic within the logic of movies, that paper would have been sued to hell and back again, and Maureen's ass would have been out of that office and out of a job so quick. Cause girl, what were you thinking? And then there's George, who I was initially thinking was the most innocent in the lot and the one who just kept getting caught, unfortunately, in the other characters' unhinged behaviors. But then this dude is making out with his employee's sibling in his employee's apartment. Like, boy, what? That is unhinged. I am sorry, sir, but I cannot be planning your schedule when I've seen your ass in my home fucking my baby sister. That is a lawsuit waiting to happen. His ass is damn lucky that Jane's unfortunate ass was in love with him, because she most certainly would have taken away his millions with that. Like what? Excuse you, HR, I have got something to report. And as if that isn't bad enough, his ass had the audacity to ask Jane to be his date to a gala the day after he had broken his engagement to Tess. Like, yes, we already know that Tess Nichols is unhinged. I have highlighted that earlier in the video, but please tell me George isn't matching her insanity levels with his, because why, oh why would you as a boss invite your assistant to be your date to an event a day after you had ended your engagement with her sister, and then she blurts out that she's liked you since she started working for you, and you then proceed to kiss her? For someone that this movie tried its best to paint as this dream, ideal, perfect man who is eco-friendly and well put together and has his shit together and blah, 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 this right there shattered all of that to smithereens and confirmed what we already knew, that George is just as unhinged as everyone else in this film. Hell, even the brides we got to see at the start of the movie aren't any different. Because I don't know how to tell anyone this, but calling your bridesmaid into the bathroom to hold your dress while you take a shit is unhinged behavior. That is so out of scope of a bridesmaid's expected duties that I was screaming in that scene. Like, sure, it affirmed the fact that Jane doesn't know how to say the word no and can't maintain her boundaries in the face of those who want to encroach on them. But at the same time, it was unhinged. Excuse you. It gives a whole new meaning to Bridezilla, that's for sure. And then, of course, there's Jane. Now, the default is to think that Jane at her most unhinged was probably the 27 dresses and what that meant, her choice to be a bridesmaid, 27 all-ass times, because she loves weddings and hopes that by catching the bouquet, she will be able to get her happy ending. And whilst I can say that that is crazy, like I've been a bridesmaid twice in my life, and that shit is not fun. To me, that wasn't Jane being unhinged, not really. Now, others might think that it was her choosing to crash someone someone else's wedding so that she can then make her declaration of love to Kevin, which I am not going to lie, that was wild as hell. I don't care how popular the article had made her. That bride herself was downright kooky for allowing this absolute stranger to crash her wedding and profess her love to yet another stranger who was there to cover said wedding. But you know what? Only someone just as unhinged will be okay with Jane's decision to show up uninvited, jump from the pair even after the boat had set off, and choose not to wait until after the reception was done, which, let us be honest, would have been normal behavior. Like Jane could have just held out and waited until things had winded down, after which she would have seen Kevin. I mean, they are on a boat. His ass wasn't going anywhere. But when you run into someone who is on the same wavelength as absolute cuckoo as your ass, then you all come up with crazy ass shit as we saw play out. But anyway, as I was saying, to me, that wasn't Jane at her most unhinged. No, the honor of that goes to her wedding day when she had the 27 brides that she had been a bridesmaid of show up as her bridesmaid wearing the different outfits that they had chosen for her to wear when she had been their bridesmaid. Because I got to that scene and had the this bitch is crazy moment. Firstly, there is no coordination. They do not match with her wedding theme. Not at all. One bit. They do not match it. They are clashing to hell and back again. Secondly, is that meant to be them wearing her 27 dresses? Because how did they fit? Like, sure, one unhinged bride had her stand in front of her at a fitting and we got the confirmation that they were the same size, but surely that can't be the same for all of them, right? And thirdly, goddamn, that is Jane being a masterclass of a troll, the unhingedness to beat them all. Because I can totally see myself forcing the friends who chose the most unflattering shit for me to wear at their wedding, forcing them to wear said unflattering shit to my wedding. It's bloody brilliant work. Unhinged, but fucking brilliant. And then let's just throw in the unhinged behavior of mid to late 2000 rom-coms that kept casting Judy Greer in secondary roles as the best friend to the person who is actively involved in weddings. I mean, they did it with Jennifer Lopez in The Wedding Planner, and they've done it yet again with Catherine Eagle in 27 Dresses. Judy Girlie, you deserve better than this. I'm so sorry. Of course, these are just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet, but I enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might potentially possibly be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.